Howdy, hey folks, welcome to a special edition of the Wednesday Word. I'm here with Patrick Murphy, Senior PR Director at BLASTmedia. Patrick, how you doing?
Doing great, how are you?
Oh, living the dream, right? Here we are.
That's right.
So today we're going to talk about a bit of a follow-up to our lazy language video. If folks remember that, talking about how to make sure your copy is nice and tight and that it's ready to go. Patrick had some great things to say about that, particularly around why we're seeing that lazy language sneak in, especially in PR writing. So we're going to dive into more of kind of the publisher angle and from the PR side as well, how to match finding the right word count for a piece and how you work with publications and focus on your team to hit that perfect spot for good content. So Patrick, take us through, you saw this lazy language video talking about how people are kind of padding these word counts right now. What about that video, like what triggered that for you? What triggered that in your head?
Yeah, well, I mean, one is personal experience of falling victim to using that lazy language myself. But,
absolutely, yeah.
The example that came to mind instantly, it was maybe days before someone in the office had brought up like, I need just like 10 more words to reach the word count for this publication and I don't know what to add. And it was like, well, do you need those words? Like, does the byline actually need those words? But this particular publication is notorious. They send back bylines if they don't meet this word count, rather than looking at the actual quality of this article. And so it seems to be a common thread with publications that there are so many who are more concerned about the word count than the quality of the response or the article.
It's interesting because I think quality is a really key piece there of how to define quality. I think for a lot of folks, I wonder if they're looking at those word counts and wondering, well, if it's longer, it's got to be better, right? I wonder, you think that's kind of getting in people's minds?
Yeah, I think longer equals you have more expertise to share. There's smarter things you can say. There's always more you could expound upon in a piece. So there's a misunderstanding of, I think, what quality is. That's definitely permeated editorial guidelines.
And it's so interesting because I wonder from the publisher's side of this, right? I think you can make a really good case for that quality angle. So why are publishers still so stuck on this word count and kind of equating the two?
I think the biggest driver in what I've heard from publications even is SEO. That is the top of mind reason for the word counts. So you have your SEO best practices on what a word count should be, and to make it more rankable, if you will. And so SEO is, I think, the top driver. I'm sure there are other reasons. I mean, you also have to take into account just consistency from the publication side. So they're wanting to maintain consistency across contributed content that they're publishing. But typically, if there's pushback on a word count, the defense will be SEO.
And I wonder, you're starting to see engines like Google come out with more expertise, authority, and trust models. That EAT model, I've been seeing that one pop up a lot. And that almost seems like it comes in direct conflict with that sense of padding word count via SEO, right? Like there's going to be probably some pushback on that.
Yeah, I would think that because the longer the word count, the more likely you are to put that lazy language, that fluff, and that is going to steal from your authority. And it's not much different in my mind than keyword stuffing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And that'll be interesting to watch that develop, especially when we look for not only Google, but Google Bard products and generative AI, which I think, in my opinion, at least thrives on that keyword stuffing, of making sure you're putting in that right keyword 8 or 10 times.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to start seeing that really come into conflict with what's being returned on Google search pages.
Yeah. I think we are so early on right now in learning how generative AI and large language models are going to impact search. But it seems at a certain point it's going to come into conflict with our best practices for SEO.
It almost has to.
Right, yeah. And so it's going to be a balance of which do you follow, and I mean, we're still in, like I said, the early stages of it, but I imagine there's going to be a big transition period where it's going to be kind of a choice of which way do you go.
It's going to be a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's from your perspective as well, and I would wonder, as you think about working with clients too, how are you advising, generative AI is one piece of it, but even on that larger point, right, of how to create content that's not reliant on massive word counts, right, getting rid of that lazy language. Have you run into situations where clients have pushed back on that a bit?
Where clients want longer pieces? Yeah, I think there's often a battle with clients where I'm trying to pull them back. The place I would say I actually see it the most is probably press releases, where I'm constantly trying to remind clients that shorter is better here. Like, if you can't package this press release into a page, like, you're probably announcing too many things. You're trying to stuff too much into it. And I think with content, we will see often, like, we're doing the work of trying to cut back to be within a word count limit. There are other paid profile opportunities like a Forbes Council, where we are limited on not just word count but character count. You're providing bite-sized tidbits. So there are things we do that help us develop that practice of, like, we need short to the point content, but I would say generally, clients tend to not struggle with saying more. And so I view it as my job to help them say the same thing in less words.
Yeah. Is it kind of a clarity of message question? So we're trying to get to really the meat and the bones of what a good message is and helping trim off that fat, essentially?
Yeah, I would say it is clarity. And there's, I think a couple of challenges you run into. One, if you have something that's super complex and technical, like B2B software companies tend to be, you're often overcompensating to make it simple and provide that clarity. But you also have companies that are selling to multiple audiences, and they're trying to communicate to all those audiences at once, and that just adds to the complexity. And you want to make sure you're covering all your bases when that, again, just leads to more complicated messaging and it doesn't actually provide the clarity you think it does. So I think it is challenging, especially as we're just seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of growth right now. AI is the big buzzword, and companies are changing what they do and how they do it constantly, and so they're constantly evolving their messaging, and that, when you're confused, you ramble, you add more words, and it steals from the simplistic central message that's easier to not only communicate but consume.
That's such a good point. That's exactly it. You mentioned the Forbes Council pieces, both from the word count and the character count with that too. It also makes me think of something like Axios' smart brevity model, where their entire business case as a publication is around concatenating the news and making it something shorter and easier to understand. And it fascinates me that hasn't caught on either from the publisher side or really that consumers are clamoring more for this. And I just think that's interesting. And from a PR perspective, I wonder what you think of that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in that. It seems that we're maybe more the appetite is like a both and. So it's not just the brevity model, but it has to point back to a long form piece and be tied back to that, because people, it seems they want access to all the details. So I'll often try and encourage clients, like in a press release, for example, can we link back to the full details here? Give the main idea in the press release here, and then direct people to where they can get the full details. And I think that's more what could catch on it, and what I think you see with Axios, and you see just the rise of newsletters in general. I mean, Morning Brew has built a whole business around these newsletters that are taking all the news and just boiling it down into this easy to consume content. But even they've taken it a step further, and they've now started a podcast that's a podcast breaking down their newsletter that's breaking down the news. So I think the appetite is growing, but we just seem to want to hold on to that, still making sure we're not losing out on anyone by not having all the details there. So I think it should catch on, and I think we, obviously we had social media around for a while, but you've also seen, like, in recent years, social media platforms actually add to how much you can post. And so, like, it is a weird back and forth battle of consumers have a short attention span, but we just want access to all the information we can get.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I wonder what the trigger or what the tipping point is going to be for this to make that transition to something like, or to really convince folks this is perhaps a more accurate path. I don't know what that would take, honestly.
I wonder if it's generative AI, if that
Maybe,
helps,
yeah.
because I think generative AI will become our knowledge base. Like that's where we'll go to learn. I mean, I've already started using it as a place to learn. You've seen conversations around how it can help with education. So I think that could be a tipping point, because it's just changing the way we view information in knowledge gathering. When we have access to, I can put my stupid questions in there and get to an answer quicker than even Google would traditionally provide me, and without having to sort through all the responses.
It's almost, I guess, time to market perhaps is one thing, but essentially time to information.
Yeah.
So can I get to the right thing faster?
Exactly.
And perhaps being able to create content that fulfills that need for something like a Google Bard or whatever iteration comes next for GPT as a search function like that. Maybe that's what tips the scales finally.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a possibility. I mean, we want the information and we want it quickly. That's why, again, you see the Morning Brew go from creating a newsletter to recap the news to now they're creating a podcast to recap the newsletter that's recapping the news. So we're just, how quickly can we get the information? And I think what was even interesting with that example is they launched the podcast and then they got feedback that it was being released too late in the day. So they started releasing it earlier in the morning because we want that information and we want it now.
Huh. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think those consumer trends are just gonna continue in that way.
Yeah.
And it kind of, that's where it has to go.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious then, as someone in your role, who is not just you, but the team you manage of PR professionals, you're looking at all these tools coming in and really this need for clearer, more compelling, brief content that would fit something like a generative AI model, or even like an Axios or something like that. You know, what kind of guidance do you give your team? What have you kind of been telling them about all this?
Yeah, I actually tell my team often that it is okay if what you put in front of me to review, for example, if it's a pitch, a subject line, a press release, it's okay if it's super long and wordy, because I think it's a lot easier for me to come in a fresh second set of eyes is super helpful to cut things down. But I'm constantly pushing my team in anything they're writing, even if it's a report or a plan that we're putting together for a client, or just sending an email to a client, to constantly, in whatever world you're living in, think about a shorter, easier way to say this. So put it in a more concise format. And also to utilize tools like ChatGPT to help you. So just like I can review something and better see a way to, hey, if you cut this, this, and this, you can make this more concise, clear, to the point. It's great, but ChatGPT can do that same thing for you. You can put something in and say, I need this to be 500 words or less. I need this to be 400 characters or less. And it can help you do that and be kind of the thought starter there. So I'm just constantly pushing, like, how can we say this in a shorter, simpler way without losing our meaning, and making sure those key terms are still in there. I mean, I think that, the presence of a keyword is still important. I imagine it's going to maintain its relevance.
Yeah,
and
for
so you want to make sure it's there, but the words around it, is there a simpler way? Often there is. And often, again, we're trying to give all those details in one place. And so, for example, someone, I just read a pitch and it cited a stat and they had according to XYZ, and I'm like, this is just a pitch.
Yeah.
You don't need to cite who it's from. If you hyperlink, it's doing the same work.
Yeah.
So cut that out and your pitch is suddenly shorter.
I was wondering, was going to ask what maybe you've been running into with folks who perhaps are newer to this, or who haven't quite gotten, that sense of storytelling yet, or how to use content to do that. That's really interesting. Kind of what other tips or tricks do you have for folks who maybe are getting into PR or have been doing it for a while and have been kind of seeing maybe some lower results and they want to pick it up a bit?
Yeah, I would say one, it's the number one lesson in PR marketing content. It's know your audience. Often when I see a pitch or a press release or a byline that is overly wordy, it's using that fluff language, it's lacking clear, concise language, it's because they don't know who they're going after. They don't know who their audience is. So I'll, for example, use a pitch. I'll look at a pitch. Who are you pitching? Well, it's going to this trade and this trade and this trade and maybe some podcasts and all. And I'm like, okay, right there, that's your opportunity to make this more clear and concise. If you're just going after retail, then you can make it super direct to the point. Retail is going to know the language of retail. They're not going to know the language of marketing. So if you're trying to combine retail and marketing, suddenly you're trying to explain marketing to retail and retail to marketing, and then suddenly you're way too wordy. And so I think knowing your audience will allow you to speak directly to them. I mentioned using a tool like ChatGPT to tell you what you could cut. Using a colleague, a friend, someone else will help you figure out what to cut. And then, again, knowing the context of what you're in. If it's a pitch, you don't have to write out, and it's not a bylined article where you're following editorial guidelines and you need to, in a pitch, I'm going to put a number 8 and not write out 8 because it's a pitch. I'm trying to make it clear. I'm going to use a big thing I think that I run into and I'll even have left on as feedback on things I write is, can this be bullet points? Can you turn this into bullet points? Would that help? Can you break this paragraph up? So looking for just small things that, again, it can be really hard to see in your own writing, but if you have a second set of eyes or when you step away and come back to it, I think you can better identify those opportunities. Again, if it's a pitch, you don't have to follow certain guidelines. If it's a press release or a byline article and you do have to follow guidelines, look for places where you're providing details that could be pointed to rather than provided right then and there. So is there a lengthy list of new features? Do you have to go in depth on all of them, or can you point back to a landing page that provides more in depth, which is going to bring more value to you in the long run? If you're going to get them, if you're going to spark some curiosity and get them to start digging on your website and exploring further beyond just your press release, that's going to lead to more value in the long run.
Does that change almost, I wonder, the website as a product in that sense too? If I'm trying to drive more traffic to my website and I'm using a pitch or media relations strategy to do that, is that more of the landing pages with key pieces of information on there? What do you think that looks like even? What's the first order of movement after that?
Yeah, I think it is, it's consistency, I would say, is a big thing, to make sure that you have the language there on your website to match whatever language you're using in press materials. And so I think you have to have that informational high-level overview there available, but it is, I personally think, breaking down and having more web specific pages to go into the details versus trying to stuff everything into one. Like if you have multiple products, even if they're similar, but they're going after different audiences, break that up, link to multiple different things. I think if you have more links, you're more likely to get someone to click on one of them.
Yeah.
So I think it is a matter of making sure you have messaging consistency, and then going deeper onto specific pages. Don't, again, try and stuff all that onto a homepage, or don't put all the details for a single press release maybe in one landing page, but it can also be your blog post to announce that goes alongside a press release, provides that much more detail than the press release. And then the landing pages pointed to, they provide much more detail than the blog post did. And so you can kind of just incrementally increase the level of details. Maybe you have a video on one of those landing pages that goes even further. So I think just you continue building, but the press release, if that's your starting point, if you're taking that media relations strategy, the starting point of the press release should be the most clear, concise, and honestly lacking the most details.
That's a lot of stuff to manage, right? As a marketing manager or someone on the team, and managing and centralizing all that information and tracking when updates come through. I mean, if you're in the tech space, how many times do you update that product, right?
Right.
And so I'm wondering, like, how you'd even manage that. Would it be a solid CMS? You'd need some processes and product roadmaps, and that's a lot of folks, a lot of information to manage.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I think that there's value in a holistic comms plan when it comes to announcements, going beyond just, hey, we're going to put out a press release and we'll put some social posts out, and maybe we'll email some customers. And I'm surprised when I am talking with clients and they have a new release and they're like, oh yeah, we don't have our landing page yet. I'm like, no, that should be priority.
Really,
like making sure those, because if you're doing media relations, it's only going to be as valuable as the other marketing work you're doing. You need a place to point people to that goes beyond just the press coverage you're going to get, or a Business Wire press release posting. So you have to make sure you're aligning your strategy, and a comms strategy should go beyond just putting out a press release. It should include making sure a website is updated, making sure, maybe not every announcement, every release, but if there's tweaks that require an informational video, you have that. Maybe you have a series of blogs that come out following the launch to make sure you're getting things updated. But it's a lot of moving pieces, and I think it's a part of detailed planning and making sure that you're fully activating announcements.
Yeah, and that's what leads us back into getting these ready for publications, right? Because now we've broken apart that information workflow and that stream of how people learn about things, perhaps into more steps, but smaller steps that are easier to commit to.
Yeah.
And I would wonder too, as companies start maybe embracing more of that philosophy, how that would reflect on the publication side and your pitching process too, right? Because now you're writing those shorter pitches, you're trying to buy in, and you're always working to buy in reporters on the concept. I would wonder how some of this might change some of that, if at all.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, you're seeing, or you're going to see more of a need to extend the life of news, and you want to see things go beyond just a single press release. And I mean, we've always said at BLASTmedia, we don't want to just be a press release factory. And I think this is a perfect example of why. And so you want to make sure that you're not just putting out a press release and then wiping your hands clean, like, all right, good, we did that, check. You want thought leadership that's related. You want that to be paired with the announcement. So that's when, also getting interview requests on an announcement. You're training your spokespeople to be able to communicate about the whatever it is you're announcing, and go more in depth than a press release. Something a change that I think people need to be aware of, and that I often coach my team on, is like, if you're pitching an announcement to a journalist and you don't have anything else beyond what's in the press release to say, you probably need to step back and think about it before you pitch it.
Good point.
Because if all you have to share is what's in the press release, you might think, oh good, I wrote a really good press release, but do you have a compelling story? And so if you can start to go beyond just the text on a press release, and that's when extra content comes into play. That's when the thought leadership you pair an announcement with comes into play. That's when additional blog posts come comes into play. If you have a podcast episode,
Yeah.
or you go on other podcasts, or you create LinkedIn videos, whatever it is, there's more content to be created. And so I think that's the biggest drive you can see is, I look at it as there's just more opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. And then as we think about how that's reflected in word counts and managing word counts and managing the size of this content, again, that breaking it apart into all these steps helps us stay clear on message with each singular piece, while over time you're, I think, perhaps more efficiently telling that story, that brand story. And I think from the publication side, I would wonder, does it even change what an article looks like? I mean, does that change the concept almost of, and maybe this is getting too heady for us, but like what does an article look like, even if we're changing how that information is given to potential buyers or consumers, right?
Yeah.
I would wonder if publication would start to mirror some of that strategy.
Yeah, I am surprised that there hasn't been as big a shift to more multimedia embedded into articles already. I mean, I think if you have the feature of you can listen to an article,
Yeah.
And so maybe instead of just listening to the whole article, like maybe it will turn into you can listen to a summary of the article, or I think we will need just more and more articles that are broken up by images, video, audio, whatever it is, things to put it into more bite-sized pieces. So I wish I had the say to change it, but I don't run a publication, but I think eventually publications are going to have to move away from just, all right, these are SEO best practices and that will dictate our word count and what articles look like. I think it's going to have to evolve.
If you had the chance to talk to publications, what do you want them to know about all this?
I would say that don't make the word count the king. Don't make that the starting point. I think it is a helpful consideration because, I mean, sure, there's certain topics that I think if you can't write a certain amount of words about, maybe it tells you don't have enough to say.
Yeah.
Like there is a line there, but I would say, yeah, don't be afraid to experiment with shorter articles, or let more imagery be incorporated into pieces. Our attention spans are just so short. I think like we are going to reach a point where like we need more pie-lined articles that are more akin to a newsletter than a periodical.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be fascinating to watch how all this develops and kind of how you manage from the PR side. What else is bugging you about this? Anything else?
It's not bugging me, but what more, I'm just very curious how generative AI does impact this all, because I do think we are seeing that appetite for change with it right now, and we're seeing the dollars invested in it. We're seeing the Googles of the world, start experimenting. And I think we'll see a different world when it comes to search in the coming years. We've already seen the rise of different types of search, searching, with video, audio, images. And so I think, there's a lot of fun, a lot of learning to be had. And, we need to push back on publications more and not making it about a word count and just kind of sticking with the quality over the quantity.
Don't make word count king. I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a t-shirt somewhere. I love it.
Maybe just for content nerds, but it is, yeah.
Patrick, thanks so much for joining today. I appreciate it.
You are very
It's great to
welcome.
have you
Thanks
here.
for having me.
Absolutely.